Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Amunatira Vanachari Amunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Shokishori Ki Jai Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Ki Jai Gonitai Ki Jai Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So today we are continuing Canto 10. It's approaching an end, but at any rate today we are doing chapter 13, text 57, or at least what we're approaching the end of is chapter 13. So text 57 is on the board. It's rather a long verse. It's not my speciality meter, so I will just chant as best I can. Itireshe take nija mahimani svapramitke Aparatrajato tanirasana mukha brahmakamito Anishepi drashtum kimedam iti va mukhyati sati Kachada jognatva sapadi paramo jajavanikam Itirishe takye nija mahimani swapramitike. Paratra jatso tanirasana mukha brahmaka mito. Anije pidrashtum kimidam mitava mukyati sati. Kachada jod gnatva sapadi paramoja javanikam. Itirishe takye nija mahimani swapramitike. Paratra jatso tanirasana mukha brahmakan mito. Anishe pi drashtum kimidam iti vamukyati sati. Kachada jognatva sapadi paramoja javanikam. Please chant. Itirishe takye ajiramanima swapamitike. Paratra jatso tanirasana mukha brahmaka mito. Anishe pidrashtum kimidam ite vamukyate sati. Chashada jodnyatva sapadi paramoja javanikam. Itirishe takye ajiya mahimanyasva pramitike. Paratra jatso tanirasana mukha brahmakanito. Nishe pidrashtum kimidam mitsiva mukyate sati. Chachada jojnatva sapadi paramoja javanikam. The word for word. Iti, thus. Ira, Ishe, Lord Brahma, the Lord of Saraswati, Ira, Atarkye, beyond, Nija Mahimani, whose own glory, Svaparamatike, self-manifest and blissful, Paratra, beyond, Ajata, the material energy, Prakriti, Atat, irrelevant, Nirasana Mukha, by the rejection of that which is irrelevant, Ramaka, by the crest jewel of the Vedas, Mital, in whom there is knowledge, Anise, not being able, Api, even, Drishtum, to see, Kim, what, Idam, is this, Iti, thus, Va, or. Mukyati sati, being mystified. Kachada, removed. Ajaha, Lord Sri Krishna. Jnatva, after understanding. Sapadi, at once. Parama, the greatest of all. Aja Javanikam, the curtain of Maya. So it's a super long purport. But the translation for text 57 is the following by Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Brahman is beyond mental speculation. He is self-manifest, existing in his own bliss, and he is beyond the material energy. He is known by the crest jewels of the Vedas by refutation of irrelevant knowledge. Thus, in relation to that Supreme Brahman, the personality of Godhead, whose glory had been shown by the manifestation of the four-armed forms of Vishnu, Lord Brahma, the Lord of Saraswati, was mystified. What is this? He thought. And then he was not even able to see Lord Krishna. Understanding Brahma's position, then at once, Lord Krishna, understanding Brahma's position, then at once removed the curtain of his yoga maya. And the purport is 3 pages. Brahma was completely mystified. He could not understand what he was seeing, and thus he was not even able to see Lord Krishna. Understanding Brahma's position, then removed that yoga maya covering. In this verse, Brahma is referred to as Iresha. Ira means Saraswati, the goddess of learning. And Iresha is her husband, Lord Brahma. Brahma, therefore, is most intelligent. But even Brahma, the Lord of Saraswati, was bewildered about Krishna. Although he tried, he could not understand Lord Krishna. In the beginning, the boys, the calves, and Krishna himself had been covered by yoga maya, which later displayed the second set of calves and boys who were Krishna's expansions, and which then displayed as many four-armed forms. Now, seeing Brahma's bewilderment, Lord Krishna caused the disappearance of that yoga maya. One may think that the maya taken away by Lord Krishna was Mahamaya, but Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that it was yoga maya, the potency by which Krishna is sometimes manifest and sometimes not manifest. The potency which covers the actual reality and displays something unreal is Mahamaya, but the potency by which the absolute truth is sometimes manifest and sometimes not is yoga maya. Therefore, in this verse, the word Aja refers to yoga maya. Krishna's energy, his Maya Shakti, or Svarupa Shakti, is one, but it is manifest in varieties. Parasya Shaktir Vividana Shriyate, Svetasvatara Upanishad 6.8. The difference between Vaishnavas and Mayavadis is that Mayavadis say that this Maya is one, whereas Vaishnavas recognize its varieties. There is unity in variety. For example, in one tree there are varieties of leaves, fruits, and flowers. Varieties of energy are required for performing the varieties of activity within the creation. To give another example, in a machine, all the parts may be iron, but the machine includes varied activities. Although the whole machine is iron, one part works in one way and other parts work in other ways. One who does not know how the machine is working may say that it is all iron. Nonetheless, in spite of its being iron, the machine has different elements, all working differently to accomplish the purpose for which the machine was made. One wheel runs this way, another wheel runs that way, functioning naturally in such a way that the work of the machine goes on. Consequently, we give different names to the different parts of the machine, saying this is a wheel, this is a screw, this is a spindle, this is the lubrication, and so on. Similarly, as explained in the Vedas, Parasya Shaktir Vididaiva Shruyate Svabhaviki Jnana Jnana Bala Kriya Cha. I usually work under a bright light, so here the light isn't what I'm accustomed to, so I have to struggle sometimes when the writing is extremely small. Krishna's power is variegated, and thus the same Shakti or potency works in variegated ways. Visuddha means varieties. There is unity in variety. Thus, Yogamaya and Mahamaya are among the varied individual parts of the same one potency, and all of these individual potencies work in their own varied ways. The Samvit, Sandini, and Ladini potencies, Krishna's potency for existence, his potency for knowledge, and his potency for pleasure, are distinct from Yogamaya. Each is an individual potency. The Ladini potency is Radharani, as Swarup Damodar Goswami has explained. Radha Krishna Pranaya Viktrir Ladini Shaktir Asmat Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela 1.5. The Ladini Shakti is manifest as Radharani, but Krishna and Radharani are the same, although one is potent and the other is potency. Brahma was mystified about Krishna's opulence, Nija Mahimani, because this opulence was atarkya, or inconceivable. With one's limited senses, one cannot argue about that which is inconceivable. Therefore, the inconceivable is called achintya, that which is beyond chintya, or thoughts and arguments. Achintya refers to that which we cannot contemplate but have to accept. Srila Jiva Goswami has said that unless we accept achintya in the Supreme, we cannot accommodate the conception of God. This must be understood. Therefore, we say that the words of Shastra should be taken as they are, without change, since they are beyond our arguments. Achintya Kalo Ye Baba Na Tams Tarkena Yayet. That which is achintya cannot be ascertained by arguments. People generally argue, but our process is not to argue but to accept the Vedic knowledge as it is. When Krishna says, this is superior and this is inferior, we accept what he says. It is not that we argue, why is this superior and that inferior? If one argues for him, the knowledge is lost. This path of acceptance is called Avaroha Parata. The word Avaroha is related to the word Avatara, which means that which descends. The materialist wants to understand everything by the Aroha Parata, by argument and reason. But transcendental matters cannot be understood in this way. Rather, one must follow that Aroha Parata, the process of descending knowledge. Therefore, one must accept the parampara system. And the best parampara is that which extends from Krishna, etam parampara praptam. What Krishna says we should accept. Imam Rajarsyo Vidu. This is called the Avaraha Parita. Brahma, however, adopted the Araha Pantha. He wanted to understand Krishna's mystic power by his own limited conceivable power, and therefore he himself was mystified. Everyone wants to take pleasure in his own knowledge, thinking, I know something. But in the presence of Krishna, this conception cannot stand, for one cannot bring Krishna within the limitations of Prakriti. One must submit. There is no alternative. Natams Tarkena Yayayet. This submission marks the difference between Krishnaites and Mayavadis. The phrase Atan Nirasam refers to the descending of that which is irrelevant. Atat means that which is not a fact. Brahman is sometimes described as Asalam, Antam, Arasam, Adirgam. That which is not large and not small, not short and not long. Brihad, Aranyaka, Upanishad 588. Neti neti, it is not this, it is not that. But what is it? In describing a pencil, one may say, it is not this, it is not that. And this does not tell us what it is. This is called definition by negation. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also explains the soul by giving negative definitions. Najayate Mriyate Va. It is not born, nor does it die. You can hardly understand more than this. But what is it? It is eternal. Aja Nitya Shishvato Yam Purano Na Hanyate Hanyamane Sarire. It is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, undying, and primeval. It is not slain when this body is slain. It's Bhagavad Gita 2:20. In the beginning, the soul is difficult to understand, and therefore Krishna has given negative definitions. The soul can never be cut into pieces by any weapon, nor can it be burnt by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. Bhagavad Gita 2:23, Krishna says, it is not burnt by fire. Therefore, one has to imagine what it is that is not burnt by fire. This is a negative definition. Om Jnanatimrandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurumilitanena Tasmaya Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Paraya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Paraswami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Paraya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschacha Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakti Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyascha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada is highlighting that the materialist wants to understand everything by argument and reason, but that transcendental matters cannot be understood in this way. One has to follow the descending process of knowledge, or particularly the parampara system. And that means the system that's descending from Lord Krishna. So the knowledge is passed intact, coming down from Lord Krishna, as opposed to utilizing one's mental capacities and through reason, hypothesis, trying to establish logical continuity and then reach a conclusion. So that's not the process that is the means for understanding transcendental knowledge. I spent a lot of time in classrooms, and I actually utilize the rational model of thinking, where I do have students give reasons for views in examining transcendental knowledge, or particularly transcendental stories, and they can make hypotheses, give examples. So I utilize that model, but the understanding is that transcendental knowledge is coming intact from a higher source, and it is accepted that way. But it's necessary to be able to think logically. So it's not denying the necessity of being able to rationally present something. It's merely saying that the conclusion, the correct conclusion, cannot be reached by that process. One has to understand that the knowledge is already intact and it's been passed down. So, and Lord Krishna explains this himself, and this is quoted by Srila Prabhupada. He just used the first line of this verse from Bhagavad Gita 4.2, where Krishna is describing this, how the intact knowledge is passed down, particularly in the lineage of saintly kings, because they were the ones who needed the knowledge in order to be able to rule an entire kingdom or several kingdoms. So this is how Lord Krishna puts it: Evam para praptam imam rajar sayo vidu sakaleneha mahata yogo nashta parantapa. So the supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in the course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it appears to be lost. So Bhagavad Gita 4.2. So Krishna's describing this very system of the transmission of knowledge. It's through a line of disciplic succession. So naturally there's prerequisites in order to be able to carry such knowledge, meaning one receives something with the correct mood of submission, attentiveness, service, etc. So it has the components other than logical reasoning that go into receiving such knowledge. One has to qualify oneself to receive that knowledge, and saintly kings were particularly in that position. They were coming from lineages in the Bhagavatam. Earlier in the 9th canto, there was an elaborate description of the lineage of kings coming in the Sun dynasty, and there was the Moon dynasty mentioned too. And one sees its very exalted personality. So they were in that, within the lineage of receiving knowledge through disciplic succession. So Srila Jiva Goswami, again Srila Prabhupada brings him up here, and it's very interesting because Srila Jiva Goswami states that before one can elaborate on various topics related to Lord Krishna, and their sambandha, or that relation that exists between him and the words that are describing him. There is also a recommended practice for worshipping him, the abhidheya, and finally there's parojana, the goal, which is to learn to love him. So it's a special kind of knowledge. It's not regular knowledge. The intricacy of connecting the words connected to him, and indeed the components of the worship of him based on that knowledge that's coming, the abhidheya, and finally also the component of learning to love him. So it's very personal knowledge, and there's obligation connected as well to receiving the knowledge. So it's different from material knowledge where, you know, one may scan some information on the internet and sort of hear it and discard it, and it's of no relevance. This is not that kind of knowledge. Receiving it means one's received something very precious, and it actually has the included within that knowledge is a recommended practice for utilizing that knowledge to assist one in worshipping. So it's a very intricate knowledge, and it also has an emotional component. So one's whole being is involved in that knowledge, meaning that one is arousing feelings in relation to knowledge about Lord Krishna, the Absolute Truth. So very intricate knowledge. So before one can elucidate these topics, one has to settle this question. And this is Srila Jiva Goswami writing in Tattva Sandarbha. He points this out. One first has to settle the question of pramana, or the reliable means of ascertaining facts in this regard. So you have to know what is reliable, the knowledge that you're receiving, considering the intricacy of this knowledge, and why one is looking at the reliable means of receiving knowledge is because when one is approaching this knowledge, one is already built in a certain way. So scanning the internet, nobody considers who's reading or who's not reading this information. It doesn't really matter. It's very much on the mental plane. It can be taken, discarded, used, not used. Naturally some knowledge has a moral component to it, but with transcendental knowledge, consideration is given to humans who are approaching the knowledge, and the understanding is that there's some shortcomings in the person who's approaching the knowledge, and one of the major, or the beginning point of the first shortcoming is that there's this a tendency to form an incorrect judgment, and especially this is so because the sensory perception that humans come with is actually somewhat inadequate for approaching transcendental knowledge, because the sensory apparatus is equipped for dealing with reality, and the confines of the body and the structure of the body allow those senses to function with certain limitations. So For instance, even the simple matter of the speed at which the legs operate. So human, I recall a person who was very dear in my life was a woman who was an athlete, and she held a record for doing the 1,000-meter sprint. And so that was, an achievement, whatever the time frame was, for being able to run or sprint 1,000 meters. Now, if one were to look at a jaguar that is utilizing the legs, that creature and that body is able to run at something, I forget if it's like 70 kilometers an hour. So something tremendous speed, faster than a car. So the human body doesn't have that capacity in terms of movement. So there's limitations in terms of the sensorial apparatus connected to the particular body. But since we're discussing humans and humans approaching transcendental knowledge, there's this understanding that sensory apparatus is limited and or inadequate at any rate for establishing contact with transcendental reality. And I'll look at this in a moment, how judgment gets affected. So the statement in Tattva Sandarbha is that this reality that one is trying to approach is supramundane, so it's not ordinary, and it's inconceivable, meaning it's inconceivable to faculties that are a bit faulty. The faculties are definitely faulty. So I'm going to look at faulty faculties for a minute, and particularly the faculty of making incorrect judgments. So, generally we find that persons in their dealings even with one another have a lot of misunderstandings. So this is a clue that there's something at fault. And modern psychology has looked at this particular challenge that faces persons, and they've looked at the validity of people's perceptions. How do you examine this? Because now the finest sense, let's say, is the mind. So the mind is that sense that's taken in everything that the other senses, the eyes and the ears and the nose, etc., have gathered from the outside world, and it's processing it. So examining, how valid is that processing. Now, a person may come to feel some negative feeling, let's say, in this processing. And so the person, because they're feeling a little negative, they'll say, okay, things are truly negative. And actually, one always needs to challenge the validity of the perception or the interpretation one's making, because one has to monitor how one is thinking. So this is that conditioned part that causes problems and allows for these incorrect judgments and inaccurate perceptions. So for instance, modern psychology analyzes that many persons walk around saying to themselves things that start with should. I should, or that person should. And just thinking like that means that one creates a feeling of pressure and resentment, just if one has that kind of thinking. And this may be going on completely subconsciously, but it's in the mind. So one's examining something, or one's processing some external information in dealing with somebody else, and the mind is saying that person should be doing, or I should be doing. So immediately some feeling of resentment comes, or some feeling of pressure. And that means that the reality, the external reality may not be in accord with that kind of thinking, because it's something that one is then imposing on whatever information is being taken in. So, so persons may always feel let down. Somebody who's walking around, if they're not monitoring their thinking and they're having many should statements, they will actually think the world is letting me down because it's not in accord with what should be done. So, and this is the most subtle of the gross senses, the mind. This is going on in the mind. Now there's even another, I'm looking at 3 examples just to illustrate this thing of how inaccurate perceptions can be. So there's another, in modern psychology, there's another one where some labeling happens. So for instance, one may create a whole negative self-image. So this ties in with the ego, where a person may make a mistake and then be incredibly hard on himself or herself and say, I'm a loser. Instead of saying, I made a mistake in this particular situation. So that kind of mislabeling in describing something means that the words that are going on in the mind are emotionally loaded. And, or even a poor woman, let's say, that's dieting, and I've even heard this verbalized, they may describe themselves as, I'm disgusting, I ate ice cream today. It's emotionally loaded words. So it's not proper intake of the external. The intake of some ice cream that's very pleasurable then has the mind bringing some kind of series of thoughts that are mislabeling that external action. Oh, you overeat, whatever. So, so you can see how perception is already getting distorted, just through if one is not monitoring one's thinking. Of course, there are perceptual judgments that have to do with even the senses, even without going even to the level of the mind, even the senses making errors. And the first one that's described in the Vedas is Brahma, or confusing one thing with another. Interesting, it was given that particular error is given the name Brahma. So for example, the light may be failing at dusk, and so one may see the outline of a tree and think from a distance one's seen a person. I have this experience because in the road where I have to walk to the train station, there's some kind of, I guess, box where magazines are. And when it's getting dark, I always think, is that a person in the distance? So I have regular experience of this. So that's one error. Just the sense of sight. With inadequate light, the sense of sight doesn't function properly, so one fails to notice, or one confuses one thing for another. And then there's another error in perceptual judgment. So this is just painting the picture of this problem of approaching transcendental knowledge. All this is going on in these limitations. So there's another error that affects perceptual judgment, and it has to do with the mind just being distracted. So, that highest sense just being a little scattered. So somebody may be close by and speaking to one and one won't even hear. I have this experience, unfortunately, regularly with in my home situation. Anyway, and not a reflection on my poor husband, but sometimes I will be saying something, but his mind is elsewhere and he will not hear. So I often have to say, I'm just checking if you heard. So this is the distracted mind. It's a second thing listed in the Vedas as a problem in creating difficulty in perceptual judgment. And there's another one that's on more subtle level. It's present in the mind, and apparently this is quite general, but it also affects perceptual judgment. There's often a desire to deceive others. And the example that's given is interesting, because the example that's given is that a teacher may be concealing something from students, something that they know, that the teacher knows. I don't have that much experience of that, because usually I'm looking for ways to fit in some piece of knowledge that can be understood at the right time. So I don't have experience of that, but this is another difficulty that's there. And finally, there's something called Karana Patava, which is weakness of the senses. Which means that one can't even focus the mind properly on something. Yeah, that I guess is easy to understand. I mean, all I have to do is sleep 15 minutes less or half an hour less than I normally do. I have that problem. So all this description I've gone into just to point out this important point that's raised in this purport by Srila Prabhupada, that a person cannot be perfectly reasonable on his own strength, and taking into account these perceptual difficulties, can see that a person's at a great disadvantage in order to be able to even make a proper judgment. So it's all to highlight the necessity, at least with transcendental knowledge, that the proper understanding, taking into account these limitations, cannot happen unless of course, the way one is approaching the transcendental knowledge, through a kind of submissiveness and willingness to hear and understand, but also that the transcendental knowledge itself is received in that disciplic succession. It's perfect. It's untouched by these frailties. So I've gone into a lot of description about that, but it was something that was highlighted a great deal in this purport. So here there's a description of the Supreme Brahman. And here it's written, he is self-manifest, existing in his own bliss, and he's beyond the material energy. And Srila Sanatana Goswami, he puts it this way. And this is in connection to this point we've reached in this verse of what Lord Brahma has seen. And so Srila Sanatana Goswami, these are his words, thus you wonderfully displayed many forms, the same as your own, all of them full in pure goodness. But we see that Brahma couldn't realize whatever sweet glory was being shown to him. He couldn't realize it. And it means that Brahma in some way wasn't approaching it with the proper qualification. And Krishna understood right away. And so he understood that he couldn't display his endless glories to Brahma. And so he paused. He didn't show any more of his opulences. And that's what you're reading here, that Brahma got exposed to Krishna in his original form. We heard that. And he also got exposed to the self-same expansions of Krishna, his Vishnu forms. And that sambandha, or that relationship between himself and Krishna, that got shown in this particular, I guess, finale that's coming up. And now, Srila Jiva Goswami had given a different usage of the word sambandha. This, here we've seen how Lord Brahma's relationship with Krishna is being revealed, that Krishna had to withdraw his opulences because Brahma wasn't actually, hadn't had the right mood in approaching it. He was still, we read a little while back, he was still thinking, oh yeah, Krishna maybe has gone to the cave, he's brought those calves here, and then I'm seeing them, and then somehow he's getting them back to the cave. So by the time I get to the cave, he's brought back those calves and cows. So he's, trying to use some form of logic. So you can see the qualification isn't quite correct. So when Krishna does reveal his self-same forms, he sees, he understands that Brahma isn't approaching with the correct qualification, so he stops it. So Brahma sees, and then he can't see anymore. So Srila Jiva Goswami, his use of this word sambandha, this relation between oneself and Krishna, which is being shown here, the relationship between Lord Brahma and Krishna, he used it in terms of, one's reading descriptions of Krishna, and then those words, the relationships of the words to Krishna. So, there's a way one is understanding those words. That's how he used the word sambandha, which is, quite interesting, taking into account, what I've described of the difficulty with which we are operating, our sensorial apparatus is operating, particularly the mind. So now, Brahma was not able to realize the sweet glories shown to him by Krishna at this moment where we've come to in this verse. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he describes, he puts it in like a nice capsulated form, what was that glory of Krishna. So here it is, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. By the agency of Yoga Maya, Krishna covered the cowherd boys, the calves grazing on the grass, and himself looking for the calves. Then Krishna showed new forms of the same produced from himself, and each having 4 arms. Then he made that Yoga Maya disappear. So this was Krishna's glory. I mean, it's so subtle, so quick, but how incredible. He's first covering the cowherd boys and the calves grazing in the calves grazing on the grass, and even himself looking for those calves. Then Krishna's showing new forms of that same lot. And then he's showing those forms being himself with 4 arms. It's quite wonderful. So that's why we get this description that Krishna made Yoga Maya disappear. And Yoga Maya, in this verse, we read the translation Aja. It's defined as the potency by which Krishna is sometimes manifest and sometimes not manifest. So it's under his control. He's controlling when he's showing himself and when he's not showing himself. Through this particular spiritual strength, his Yoga Maya. And this can be contrasted with Mahamaya, which was brought up against also in this purport, that contrast. The Mahamaya is that potency which covers the actual reality and displays something unreal. So quite different. In our, I guess, a regular example that's given of Mahamaya operating is, persons walking around and imagining that they're controlling their whole environment. They've actually got everything ordered, they know what they're going to do, they've got their schedule planned, they're completely in charge. This is a form of Mahamaya operating. Because naturally the fundamental understanding thereof, the nature of reality is not taken into account, and that is that it's constantly changing, it's in flux, there's the karmic component, very complex. And naturally, if one is taken to transcendental knowledge, one understands the most important factor, and that is that Krishna's overseeing everything. So, yeah, so hence one is thinking something is reality, but it's completely unreal because it's that view is oblivious of so many factors in the picture, so many. So Sutta Goswami describes something of the state of mental speculation. So looking at the common materialistic conditioned soul, because we're looking at how transcendental knowledge is approached, the common materialistic conditioned soul, there's some speculation involved. So if one's not receiving knowledge, the conclusions given, that then one has to meditate on and try and comprehend and tease out and get all the details, but rather one is approaching trying to understand an existential reality through one's mental, intellectual strength, taking into account all these problems, perceptual problems, these that are present in the mind, then out of ignorance, this is the description in the Bhagavatam, this is what actually happens. And this is from Srimad Bhagavatam 1:11-37. Out of their ignorance, they think that the Lord is affected by matter, although he is unattached. So with that approach, God must be the same as me. I'm affected, I get happy, unhappy, etc. God must be the same. So that's actually what transpires. Thinking that the Lord is affected by matter, although he's unattached, because there's that other fundamental component of attachment. So not being able to understand, or thinking one understands, is because one is attached to one's views. And here it is, you've got an entity, the Supreme Being, who's not affected and is unattached. It's quite a profound obstacle to overcome. Quite profound. So, Srila Prabhupada explains that persons in conditioned life cannot go beyond their own personal capacity. So, on one's own level of limited capacity, one considers the Lord a common man. And we can see how this ties in with Lord Brahma to some degree. He was trying to equate my mystic's ability is this much, so Krishna's mystic ability must be this much. But he discovered it was way beyond what he imagined. So if one has this kind of outlook, then one cannot be convinced that the personality of Godhead is always unaffected by material nature. It's very difficult to convince such a person. And the ways of being, because that person is so caught up in their way of being because they're under the control of material nature, they just compare everything from the standpoint of experimental knowledge of their own selves. So the comparison is with oneself, because that's the known. So with transcendental knowledge, you approach the unknown where it's made known by great seers, but for the materialist, the known is themselves. So the comparison is with themselves. And the conclusions then can be called completely unauthentic. So from the Srimad Bhagavatam version. And this is described also in Srimad Bhagavatam in 1.11.38. There's a component that's completely missing if one's approaching transcendental reality that way. And this is and this is described in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.11.38. This is the divinity of the personality of Godhead. He is not affected by the qualities of material nature, even though he's in contact with them. Similarly, And similarly, the devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord do not become influenced by material qualities. So this is interesting because naturally one would ask the question, did Lord Brahma get affected by material qualities? And that's a very important point raised in this purport, that actually it wasn't Mahamaya that was operating, but Yogamaya. So Krishna was allowing himself to be visible and then not visible. So you can see that actually the statement is correct. The devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord do not become influenced by material qualities. He actually wasn't influenced by material qualities. He just was trying to approach more from a kind of logic standpoint. So the conclusion is that taking this version into account, that Krishna is the supreme origin, and he's described as being beyond logic. We have to accept that he's beyond logic. And the word over here is used, atarkye, self-manifest and blissful. Pramitke. So he's manifesting himself and he's blissful. So, carrying on. Thus one can say that if Krishna does not personally reveal himself, there's absolutely no means, not even really by scriptural knowledge, to realize him. He has to reveal himself. And this he did with Lord Brahma very kindly. So, this divinity of the personality of Godhead is never in contact with the qualities of material nature in any circumstance, even though he's in contact with the qualities. So this is very interesting. He's in contact with those qualities of material nature because he's the ultimate source of everything. Yet he's above the actions of those qualities. So this is the verse that explains that. Kavim Puranam Amashishtaram Anor Aniyamsam Anumaretya Sarvasya Dataram Achintya Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat one should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who's the maintainer of everything, who's beyond all material conception, who's inconceivable, and who's always a person. He's luminous like the sun, and he's transcendental beyond this material nature. It's from Bhagavad Gita 8:9. So, and this is spoken by Krishna himself. And so this is that state of unwavering mind. So when one has accepted transcendental knowledge, the mind stops wavering. So there's the focus is proper, and one rises above those defects of the mind. That inability to focus, not understanding a particular object or mistaking what a particular object is, even that part of wanting to deceive others. All those defects of the mind fall away when the mind becomes focused on the transcendental Supreme Person. So he has to be remembered as one who has the power to enter the jiva. So he's smaller than the jiva, actually. So this is the beauty of everything about Krishna. It's so unusual. He's smaller than the spirit soul, and he has that power to even enter. And having entered, he's also the teacher of the human, the human being. So unusual. He's present and he's acting as the teacher of the particular soul. And even though he's so small, he holds the whole universe within himself. So it's quite extraordinary. So this is possible because his very form is inconceivable. So you can't look with your senses, armed with your senses. You just cannot. So his form is achintya rupam. It's inconceivable. He's smaller than the atom, and also he's the container of everything within the universe. And it means that he's the greatest in size. So he's smaller than the smallest atom, but he's the greatest in size as well, because he contains everything within the universe. So clearly logic doesn't apply here. I often do, when the opportunity presents itself in classes with young students, of what is possible. This is a favorite one. So logic can't apply. So he's therefore known, it's the second conclusion, based on scriptural disciplic succession knowledge, as Yogeshvar, the master of mystic power. And this is what Lord Brahma comes to understand. He has to reach that conclusion through Krishna kindly revealing himself, that Krishna is the master of mystic power. So Brahma was bewildered by that form that he saw, or as Srila Baladev Vijayabhusan says, the Lord is self-revealing like the sun. Aditya Varnam. He reveals himself and others. So in this verse, there is the verse that I'd read about how one needs to meditate on Lord Krishna, meaning that He's one who knows everything, who's the oldest, who's the controller, who's smaller than the smallest, who's the maintainer of everything, who's beyond all material conception, who's inconceivable, and who's always a person, who's luminous like the sun, and he's transcendental beyond this material nature. This is something, this verse is in that section of the Bhagavad Gita where the yoga process is highlighted. And the person who's accumulated impressions arising from the experience of their internal meditation, that person can establish, they control their prana and place it in the Ajna chakra. And so one can perceive the truth only still by the mercy of the Lord, taking into account what we've understood of, entering, teaching. He's performing that role. And so understanding Brahma's bewilderment, Krishna Krishna is showing that his activities can't be limited by time and place. And in fact, nobody can really surpass Krishna's abilities, no matter how capable he is. And that included Lord Brahma, and this is emerging from this past time. And as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur states, from this incident, we can understand that even with the destruction of the material and spiritual worlds, the opulence of Krishna is never hampered. That's the extraordinary mystic power. It's never hampered. So that was what I extracted from this verse, this very extensive purport of Srila Prabhupada. I went into some microscopic detail, if there's any thought on the matter.
Hare Krishna, Mother Krsnarcana, thank you for your class. And my comment and question is related to try to connect 2 points. You were mentioning Krishna is transcendental. He's never affected by the qualities of material nature. You quoted some verses. And you also said we have the tendency to judge others. And in Vaishnava K, by Bhaktisiddhanta Jayapataka Maharaj, gives his commentary on one particular, to verse 3 of that commentary. He says, just as a spider never entangled by his web, so Krishna can never be entangled in the web of material existence. And the reason I love that analogy is because we kind of see that there's kind of 2 sights or visions, web sight and wisdom sight. Krishna, because he's not entangled, his vision is not entangled in the web of material existence, he doesn't have the tendency to make incorrect judgments against others, like you were mentioning. Vedaham samatitani vartamandani char arjuna bhavishyani chapudani mam tu vedanakashana. In chapter 7, he says, I know everything in the past, present, and future. In chapter 18, he says, Ishwara sarvabhutanam hridesha arjuna tishati. He also is in the heart within everyone. So he could see on the inside, outside, up, down, whatever. But our vision is very limited. And so I kind of like to stick to that point where you were mentioning, because we see that sometimes this is an obstacle in our relationship with others, like you were mentioning, the tendency to unnecessarily judge others. There's so many pastimes. Shiva gave a Bhagavatam with his wife on his lap. That could be an incorrect judgment. Ramananda Roy seemed like he was impure. But those pastimes not too serious. The serious pastimes where we make incorrect judgments are pastimes such as Ramachandra Khan. He misjudged Haridasa Kaur or Durvasa Muni. He misjudged Ambarish, and because of this misjudgment, they wanted to take serious action against those persons. And so, from these pastimes, one lesson that I've learned and try to keep in mind all the time is that we basically see there's 2 types of personalities in the scriptures. Those who try to prove others have bad character, and those who try to improve others' bad character. Ramachandra Khan, he wanted to prove Haridas had bad character. Therefore, what did he do? He spied. He set up cameras I know he has bad character. So one last point that came to mind related to this point, and is regarding the tendency to unnecessarily judge others. This is kind of one point many devotees brought up before, my brother, but one person who brought it up recently was Bhakti Josh, because Jitendra asked him a question recently in this class about practical service. And I really appreciate Josh's answer. It reminded me of something my brother said regarding practical service, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Josh said that there's sufficient practical service going on. However, there's maybe not enough Hari Katha going on. And if there's not enough Hari Katha going on, then what's the result? The tendency to form misjudgments against others. And one thing that came to mind is that Lord Chaitanya told Rupa Goswami, the most 5 powerful forms of practical service is Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtan, Bhagavad Shrava, Mathura, Srimutir, Shradaya Sevam. One of those forms of practical service is Bhagavad Shrava. And last point, one point that I really appreciate my brother saying connected to this point is that my brother in one class, it was a very funny point. He said sometimes when people see you studying the Bhagavatam or hearing lectures, they make a judgment. Would you like to do some practical service, Prabhu? As if cleaning, like you could see pot washing, you could see the results of those, you could see the results of mopping, you could see the results of so many things, but you can't see the results of cleaning your mind. And what happens if you don't do the practical service of cleaning your mind? The tendency, Kali Yuga, quarrels. So my question is that what are some steps we could take, or what do you say to persons who say, let me do practical service? I'm doing practical service, but we see you can't run a machine without reading the manual. This body is Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam, it's a yantra, and the Gita says it's a yantra, and Prabhupada mentioned many times, you can't run a yantra, a machine, without a manual. In much the same way, in order for us to make proper judgments against others, then we need to read the manual. So what do you say to a person that says, I don't have time to read Bhagavatam as much as I want to, I'd rather do practical service, I don't have time to hear. But we see that Krishna, like you were mentioning, Krishna could fit the entire universe within his mouth. If Krishna could do that, then it's certainly within Krishna's power to fit the Bhagavatam into our schedule or some hearing. And can see if we desire it. There's another pastime that's explained, but maybe you could expand on some of those points for people who say, I have no time to hear Bhagavatam, therefore I spy on others, I criticize, I gossip, this and that. And we see that goes on all the time, spy on Bhagavatam, what can we do to spy on Bhagavatam?
So your question, Jai Baladev, is the difficulty some persons have in being very much bent on doing practical service and finding themselves actually having difficulty to make time to study Bhagavatam or hear lectures, and at the same time you are highlighting an example of your brother who who found it amusing that somebody was, at least this was implied in your statement, in recounting his response, that somehow the reading of Bhagavatam or the study of Bhagavatam was not a practical activity. He found that amusing because he saw it as practical as were one, mopping, cleaning, whatever. Yeah, from the point of view of effect, as you say. So, you particularly quoted Jitendra the previous day having, or 2 days ago, having put an emphasis on the necessity of practical service. I think it will be very necessary to have Jitendra say something to that on that point, because I know he feels very strongly about that, because he epitomizes for the many decades that he's been serving here the necessity of performing practical service, and one could say that that's part of his devotional practices, the actual practical service, in the same way that somebody whose makeup may be such that they are able to have abilities where they can take the knowledge and present as teachers to others. So in either case, whether one is performing a plethora of practical devotional activities that are visible, as you put it, or performing devotional activities that are much more private and take the form of interacting with Krishna and the descriptions of Krishna and the whole philosophical knowledge presented in the Vedas. One can't put them on a scale and say, as you pointed out, and that your brother was feeling very strongly about, as I understand from what you've relayed, both are equally practical. It has to do with the particular strengths of the individual and how they can best utilize the abilities that came with the particular body that they have in order to practically serve. Because in each case, there is practical service that comes from the activity. So the person who is studying is doing it for the purpose of being able to present the knowledge. So, and the person who's like dear Jitendra, who you may see painting or fixing a floorboard or a baseboard or transporting debris into a dumpster, all those things, there's a practical component. It's keeping the building in which the deities are residing, to which a whole community is coming to worship, in perfect working order. So in both cases, there's an ability of the particular abilities of the individual are being employed in a way that is serving. So the important part is the serving part. Why are you performing the activity? To serve. So to say that one negates the other, or that the other's in some way to be valued more, that wouldn't be a correct understanding, because where it starts is the ability of the person, and then there has to also be balance. So let's say, for instance, a person's ability is very much, say, like Jitendra has practical ability and, the ability to work with the structure and the maintenance of the structure. He's also showing balance, because here he is seated in the Srimad Bhagavatam class. So there has to be balance. So, you give attention to what's needed. So I'm sure Jitendra Prabhu understands perfectly well the great importance of giving attention to the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in the same way, the person who's actually spending a lot of time studying or, putting the material together for presentation, that person also has to have balance. That person may have to cook just to maintain their lives and offer to the deity. So that's, further practical activity, or clean the space in which they reside so that everything's harmonious and it's a clean mode of goodness environment. Or at any rate, there has to be a practical activity of a physical nature as well, apart from the practical mental activity of thinking. So in all cases, there has to be balance. So that's just a response. And Jitendra has to speak because you did quote him, and it's very important that he has some comment on the notion of practical service.
I remember Srila Prabhupada, I think he said, sannyasis are meant for preaching. They're not meant for management, because management is a little, you're over here and there, and but his sole function of the sannyasi was to, of course, Prabhupada said, they asked him, there are 4 classes of men, what class are you? And he says, I'm a 5th class man, I serve all the other classes. But then, then he also said, do the needful. And then he said, can't means won't. Oh, I can't do that, Prabhu. No, it's you won't do that. That was the impression I got from those statements, but I remember I was talking to some devotees in New Vrindavan, and they were telling, because we had devotees at the Evanston Temple go to New Vrindavan, and they said, they came back and they said, they just work you to death there, it seems like, there's always so much work to do, it's so much physical work. And then I went there and I talked to this one devotee, and he says, yeah, we just laid 3 miles of PVC drainage throughout the whole complex. It took and then they're building a road there, and all the devotees are, they're making the brick that goes into the road, and then they're doing everything. And it was just like pretty amazing how they were all, doing so much physical stuff, even in the dead of winter, and then I was just kind of, this is pretty easy compared to what they're doing, But I've had devotees come up to me and say, can you come over to my apartment and help me change a light bulb? Because they had to take the fixture apart in order to get at the light bulb. And I was thinking, wow, experience is the best teacher, Prabhu, So, when I came, I didn't know, anything really, but at the Evanston Temple, there was so many little things to do, and they would ask everybody and, kind of push the limits on people, so that's how I got my experience, and they give you those little phrases. Can't means won't, Prabhu. We must do the needful, those kind of things. But that's how Prabhupada said, my spiritual master pushed me and I'm pushing you. So, one time there was this devotee named Jagadish, and he was in charge of education, but actually Prabhupada also put him in Mayapur into a management position. And he came there and he says, there's no bathrooms here. Why isn't this being done? And then he looked at the devotee and he says, you are a fool, although you're the minister of education, you're a fool, So, but Prabhupada had a way of pushing those buttons, to bring about the best in everybody. But, we're not so experts, so we kind of maybe pushed the wrong buttons, just like what happened here in the lobby the other day, that's just my experience, And then one other thing is with me, I was at the Evanston Temple, and they asked me to dismantle the Rath Yatra cart because they wanted to make there was a swimming pool there, and it used to be a YMCA, and they said, well, we got to get the Rath Yatra cart out there before we can build ashram there. So they asked me to do that, and somebody else was supposed to help me, but they didn't show up, so I wound up doing most of the work. And then the temple president came in and said, turn off the lights. And so he turned off the light, and then I said, turn on the lights, because I couldn't see what I was doing. And then he said, tell Jitendra I'm going to break his neck. And then I thought, wow. I just grabbed the tools because they weren't mine, and I was leaving, And I was thinking, well, maybe Jayananda or Jesus would say, how can I help you, Prabhu? So I get this mentality. I think, well, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the police station and file a report, you know. But then I said, Prabhupada says, your love for me will be shown by your cooperation amongst themselves. So I had all this thing going on inside, but, you know, it's just, certain things just happen, you know, like what happened here the other day. We have no control over, I mean, I can't control your senses. You know, I mean, please control your senses, Prabhu. I can't control them for you. So I just, you know, think like that. And, but Prabhupada pushed the right buttons, and, you know, one instance, Srila Prabhupada, this man came and he asked Srila Prabhupada to sing him a song. And so Prabhupada sang the man a song, you know. He was an Indian man. And then the man left, and then Prabhupada said, the devotee said, well, Prabhupada, you know, usually when people come, you give them the philosophy right out, and, you know, you set them straight, give them the sauce, you know, something to that. And then Prabhupada says, I could see he was a simple man, and he could only accept so much. So I sang him a nice song. And Prabhupada said, leave him with a good disposition, or leave him with a good impression. So those are a few things that just came up, you know. But,
thank you very much for sharing, Jitendra Prabhu. At least what struck me very much from your speaking was you brought up another tremendous point about what helps one to perform some activities that, I mean, taking into account that everything is practical in Krishna consciousness, some activities that maybe one may not choose to do of one's own volition, but it's with the spirit of wishing to cooperate. I really appreciate that point. I mean, a lot, like recently I was speaking to two devotees who had dropped a major service, and they were presenting, you know, the functioning of the mind. Like even the attempted logic wasn't clear as to why the service had been dropped, and it wasn't well received, but I commented to them that, you know, how one deals with anything is you take shelter of the service. If you take shelter of the service, all that mental whatever, even that falls away. So I think you're an example of having taken shelter of the service, Jitendra. So thank you very much for telling us or recounting something of your experience in the time when the temple was in the old YMCA building, and the dismantling of the Rath cart, and how you had to hit that block in the mind where the mind...
you just turn the mind off, you know. I was thinking of devotees. They would come to Prabhupada and he would say, what would you like to do for Krishna? You like Krishna, don't you? What would you like to do for Krishna? Oh, I like to maybe dress you know, the deities, or, you know, cook or stuff. And then I think he said later that that's karma yoga, but bhakti yoga, you do what I ask you to do for Krishna. So that takes it to a higher level, you know. Do this, do that, you know. But anyways, those are a few things that come to mind.
Oh, thank you very much, Jitendra. That last point is tremendous, where you're operating with under the direction of a transcendentalist in a very advanced position, then automatically you're uplifted. So that's a tremendous point, and especially in line with this whole idea that transcendental knowledge has to be taken in that kind of submissive and willing, with a submissive and willing mood, pushing aside all the those patterns in the mind and the parts, the way the body is built already with the mind and the senses having these problems, pushing that aside, then one indeed, the consciousness is elevated by the kindness of going with the instruction given by the advanced transcendentalist.
When in the movie, the Hare Krishna movie, there was a thing, Shama Sundar was explaining. He says, well, you know, we were young and Srila Prabhupada is getting us to do all these things. And he asked Brahmananda, he said, start a magazine, or, you know, and they didn't know where to turn, you know, for something like that. But, and then one Mataji, she was not an artist, but then Prabhupada said, try to paint something for Krishna, and then just by the desire to please the spiritual master, the ability was given. So I guess you're looking at the clock. So.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking, wow, I had no idea.
It's 9:11. Oh, it's almost 9:15.
But Jitendra, it's of historical relevance that you had shared all these insights, so thank you very, very much.
Well, I usually give him 10 minutes, but today it seemed like I took 10 minutes.
Turn. So, Jai Baladev, you missed out a little bit on the second comment. Sorry, it's a break in the pattern. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. I truly didn't even look.